I took the job because I was drowning. Not metaphorically, well, yes, metaphorically. But the kind of drowning where the water is made of medical bills and past due notices and the grey, grinding certainty that you failed everyone who ever believed in you. My father had his stroke in March. By June, I'd been laid off from the startup. By August, I was answering Craigslist ads I'd normally delete on site, only $500 a week. Remote caretaking, Rockies, solitude required. The email came from a lawyer's office in Durango representing a Mr. Halley, who was recovering from spinal surgery in Arizona and needed someone to winterize his cabin. Log wildlife activity and accept a weekly grocery delivery. No guests, no parties, no social media posts revealing the location. Deposit in advance. 6 weeks minimum. I said yes before I'd finished reading. The drive took 4 hours. Denver to I-70, then south through towns that thinned from strip malls to gas stations to nothing. The last 30 miles were switchbacks carved into granite, pine trees leaning over the road like eavesdroppers. My sedan rattled over potholes the size of laundry baskets. Twice I had to reverse to let logging trucks pass, their drivers staring at me with the flat curiosity you'd give a tourist who'd taken a wrong turn into someone else's century. The cabin sat at the end of a fire road so narrow I scraped both mirrors on branches. It crouched in a basin ringed by slopes thick with lodgepole pine and aspen, going yellow at the edges. Elevation, 9,300 feet according to my GPS. The air tasted like snowmelt and resin. A slate-grey lake spread across the basin floor, its surface so still it looked like poured metal. No docks, no boats, no ripples. The cabin itself was larger than I'd expected. 2 stories, riverstone foundation, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Neat, almost aggressively tidy. Firewood stacked in cords under blue tarps. Windows with actual shutters, the kind you could close and latch from inside. The front door had an iron deadbolt the size of my fist. I used the key from the lockbox, and the door opened onto a smell I can only describe as correct. Wood smoke, dust, old wool, and something mineral like whetstones. The interior was spare but comfortable. A stone hearth dominated the main room, blackened from decades of use. A kitchen with a propane stove and a sink that groaned when I tested the tap. Shelves lined with canned goods, mousetraps, batteries, and a first aid kit that looked military grade. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, both beds made with hospital corners. On the dining table, next to a Coleman lantern and a box of Strike Anywhere matches, sat a leather-bound journal. The kind with unlined pages and a strap that buttoned closed. A folded envelope had been tucked inside the front cover. The envelope was labeled in neat slanting script. "Rules, read twice," I laughed. Out loud. The sound fell flat in the cabin's stillness, like it had been absorbed by the walls. I opened the envelope. Rules for the Basin Cabin. After sunset, do not open the door for anyone who knocks more than 3 times. If you hear chains from the tree line, turn on the porch light and count to 40. Do not look outside until you finish. Never leave food on the deck rail. The birds are not birds. Between 2:13 and 2:19 a.m., do not look into any window glass. Draw curtains if you must pass. If the lake fog reaches the porch, say "not for me" out loud and close your eyes until the wind changes. These rules exist because previous watchers learned them the hard way. Do not test them. Do not assume they are metaphor. I read them twice as instructed. Then I set the envelope down and went to unload my car. Mountain folklore. Isolation humor. Every rural place has its legends. The hitchhiker who vanishes, the bridge you don't cross at midnight, the old woman who counts your teeth. This was just a version of that, amplified by altitude and distance. Mr. Halley, or whoever had written these, probably enjoyed spooking the help. Maybe it was a test to see if I'd bail. I wouldn't. I couldn't afford to. But as I carried my duffel upstairs, I noticed the windows. Every single one had blackout curtains on a pull cord, the kind you see in hotel rooms. And all of them were drawn, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon and the light outside was still strong. I opened the curtains in my bedroom. The view was breathtaking. The basin spread below, the lake a smoky mirror, the pines climbing the slopes in dark waves. Beautiful, postcard perfect, and utterly silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. I stood there for a full minute, listening, nothing. Then from somewhere near the lake I heard it, a single metallic clink, like a chain shifting against stone. It lasted less than a second. Then silence again, heavy and waiting. I closed the curtains. The first night I made dinner, canned chili, toast, weak coffee, and sat by the hearth as the light drained from the sky. The cabin's timbers made settling noises, ticking and creaking like a ship adjusting to a swell. Outside, the wind began to move, but it didn't blow through the basin. It circled. I could hear it spiral around the cabin, brushing the walls in a pattern like something pacing. At 9:47 p.m., I locked the deadbolt and checked all the windows. I reread the rules, this time with the journal open beside me. The first dozen pages were wildlife logs, elk sightings, fox tracks, a black bear near the woodpile in 2018, normal. Then the entries got stranger. The basin keeps what it's given. June 1996. Fog comes up from under the lake, not across it. September 2009. If the birds gather on the deck rail at dusk, do not meet their eyes. They will remember you are. April 2003. I closed the journal. My hands were cold. At 10:14 p.m. something knocked on the door 4 times. Evenly spaced, deliberate. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my mouth. The knock came again. 4 taps, identical rhythm. Then a voice, soft, female, muffled by the door. Hello? My heart kicked like a drum. I stood, moving slowly, and approached the door. The peephole showed nothing but wet wood and darkness. No silhouette. No movement. Hello? Is someone there? The voice asked again. It sounded young, uncertain, human. I put my palm on the deadbolt. Hikers got lost. It happened. Maybe someone had seen the light, needed help. It was the decent thing to... Rule 1. After sunset, do not open the door for anyone who knocks more than 3 times. 4 knocks. Not 3. I stepped back from the door, pulse hammering in my throat. The knocking stopped. The voice did not call again. I waited, counting my breaths, until the cabin's silence returned. Then I climbed the stairs, locked myself in the bedroom, and did not look out the window. At dawn, I checked the porch. There were muddy footprints leading up to the door. Small barefoot prints, child-sized. They stopped at the threshold, perfectly aligned as if someone had stood there on tiptoe. But they didn't continue. No prints leading away, just stopped. And carved into the doorframe, waist-high, was a single scratch, deep, smooth, deliberate. They had curved like a signature. I went back inside and reread the rules. They didn't feel silly anymore. They felt like a line someone had chosen to live behind. I didn't sleep that first night. Not really. I lay in the narrow bed upstairs, listening to the cabin's vocabulary, the hearthstones cooling with faint pops, the roof beams contracting in the cold, the wind combing through the pines with a sound like radio static. Every noise felt weighted, intentional, as though the building itself were deciding whether to trust me. By dawn, I was exhausted and wired, my mind looping through explanations. A lost hiker, except no hiker walks barefoot at 10,000 feet in October. A prank, except the nearest human was 30 miles of bad road away. A child, except the footprints ended at the door, and the scratch in the wood was too clean, too deep. Made by something harder than fingernails. I made coffee and stood on the porch, watching the mist peel off the lake in slow curls. The basin was still. No birds called. No squirrels chattered. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like the pause before a choir inhales. I inspected the scratch again in full light. It was a single arcing gouge, as if someone had dragged a blade or a claw from left to right with great care. The wood around it was clean. No splinters, no roughness. Surgical. The footprints had dried into faint outlines. I crouched and studied them. 5 toes, a heel, an arch. Human proportions. But the stride was wrong. They were spaced too far apart, as though whoever made them had been standing on something elevated, or... I stopped that thought. I wasn't ready for it yet. I took photos with my phone, not because I planned to show anyone. Who would I tell? But because I needed proof for myself. Proof that I wasn't imagining this. That I wasn't the one going strange. By mid-morning, I'd settled into the routines Mr. Halley's instructions outlined. I checked the pipes, bled the upstairs radiator, tested the propane levels. I logged the weather. Clear, 38 degrees, wind southwest at 5 mph. I wrote in the wildlife journal, no birds observed, no mammal tracks. Lake surface undisturbed. It felt absurd to write that last line. Of course the lake was undisturbed. There were no boats, no wind. But I wrote it anyway because the journal expected it. Decades of entries had established a rhythm, a call and response between the watcher and the watched. I was part of that now. I flipped back through the older logs looking for context. Most were mundane: 3 elk near the northwest ridge, fresh scat, red-tailed hawk mature female circling at approx 1400 acres, but every few pages there were notes that didn't fit the pattern. The knocking came again. I counted 5 this time. I did not answer. The scratch is deeper. November 2001. Something stood in the lake at dawn. Humanoid shape, waist deep. Did not move for 40 minutes. When I looked away to get binoculars, it was gone. July 1998. Rule 3 is not a suggestion. I left a sandwich on the rail. By evening, there were 17 birds. They did not eat. They waited. I brought the food inside. They left one by one backward. August 2012. I closed the journal. My coffee had gone cold. I spent the afternoon splitting firewood, mostly to burn off adrenaline. The axe was perfectly balanced, the blade oiled and sharp. I worked until my shoulders ached, and the woodpile had grown by half a cord. Physical work helped. It gave me something to control. As the sun dropped behind the western ridge, the basin filled with shadow. The temperature plunged. I went inside, locked the door, and lit the hearth. The fire caught quickly, the flames loud and greedy. I made dinner: rice, canned chicken, freeze-dried vegetables, and ate by the fire. The journal open beside me. At 8:32 p.m., I heard the chains. It started as a faint clinking, like metal shifting in a toolbox, distant, directionless. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. The sound grew. Not louder, denser, as if a dozen chains were being dragged or shaken, or sifted through someone's hands. It came from the tree line to the north, where the pines stood thickest. I remembered Rule 2. If you hear chains from the tree line, turn on the porch light and count to 40. Do not look outside until you finish. My legs felt bolted to the floor. The chain sound continued, rhythmic and patient, like someone conducting an experiment. Testing how long I would wait, I forced myself to stand. I walked to the door, flipped the porch light switch, and started counting aloud. 1, 2, 3. My voice sounded small. 4, 5, 6. The chains grew sharper, more distinct. I could hear individual links sliding against each other. 13, 14, 15. Something scraped the outside wall. Wood on wood, deliberate and slow. 23. 24. The porch boards creaked. Not from wind. From weight. 31. 32. I kept my eyes on the floor, on my socked feet on the hearthstones. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. 39. 40. The chain sound cut off instantly, as if a switch had been thrown. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. The only sound was the fire and my own breathing. I turned off the porch light and exhaled. I didn't look outside until morning. When I finally opened the door, the porch was empty. No scratches, no prints. But on the top step, arranged in a neat line, were 4 pieces of bark, thin, curled, the color of old bone. Each one had been carved with shallow grooves, 4 parallel lines like claw marks. I picked one up. It was cold, smooth, deliberate. It wasn't a threat. It was a greeting. I went back inside, updated the journal, and wrote Rule 2 observed. Count completed. No visual contact made. Evidence left. 4 marked bark pieces. The basin is aware I am here. I underlined the last sentence twice. The rules weren't just instructions. They were a contract. A way to coexist with something that lived here long before the cabin, long before the name on the deed, long before people had words for what walked between the trees. I was a guest. And guests follow the rules, or they become part of the place. Caleb Rourke arrived on the 4th morning in a battered F-250 that sounded like it was chewing gravel. I heard him before I saw him. Diesel rattle, country radio, the slam of a truck door that echoed off the basin walls. He came up the porch steps with the ease of someone who'd done it 100 times, carrying a toolbox and a thermos, grinning like we were old friends. "You must be Maya," he said, offering a calloused hand. "Caleb. I do the maintenance up here, chimneys, generators, the well pump when it gets pissy. Mr. Halley said you'd be holding down the fort." He was broad-shouldered, maybe mid-40s, with a graying beard and the kind of sun-damaged skin you get from decades of outdoor work. His eyes were quick, skeptical, amused. He looked at the cabin the way you'd look at a familiar dog, fondly but without illusion. I let him in. He moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking the flue, testing the damper, inspecting the hearthstones for cracks. He worked quietly, competently, and I felt myself relax slightly. Another human. Proof that people came and went from this place. That it was survivable. You settling in okay? He asked, brushing soot from his hands. Yeah, it's quiet, he laughed. Quiet's an understatement. You're about as alone as you can get in Colorado without a helicopter. But it's a good cabin, solid. Mr. Halley takes care of it. I hesitated, then pulled out the folded rule sheet. Did he leave these for you too? Caleb glanced at the paper, and his grin widened. Oh yeah, the famous rules. Old man's got a poet's brain, I'll give him that. Birds are not birds. Lake fog that listens. That's cabin fever in a list, sweetheart. You don't follow them. Follow them? He laughed again, louder this time. I've been coming up here for 8 years. I've left sandwiches on the rail, looked out the windows at 2 a.m., opened the door for every Tom, Dick, and hallucination that knocked. You know what happened? Nothing, it's a mountain. Mountains are weird. They make noise. They play tricks with light, but they're not out to get you. His certainty was intoxicating. I wanted to believe him. I wanted the scratches and the footprints and the chain sounds to be wind and woodpeckers and my own exhaustion. But I didn't. Maybe you've just been lucky, I said quietly. He shrugged, snapped his toolbox shut. Or maybe the rules are how lonely people cope with being alone. He stayed for coffee. We sat on the porch, the morning sun finally cresting the ridge and pouring weak gold across the basin. Caleb told me about other cabins he maintained, about the summer tourists who got lost and the winter storms that buried roads for weeks. He was easy to talk to, normal, grounded. Then halfway through his second cup we both heard it. Chains, faint, distant, coming from the northern tree line. A soft clinking, rhythmic and patient, like someone sifting through a box of loose links. Caleb's smile faltered. He set his mug down and stood, walking to the porch rail. That's new. Caleb, I started. Probably a game camera, he said, leaning over the rail to peer into the trees. Or a trap someone set and forgot. Hello, he called, voice echoing. You need help out there? The chain sound continued. It didn't get louder. It didn't stop. It just was, like the hum of power lines. Caleb, Rule 2 says, I know what it says. He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. But I also know these woods. There's no such thing as... The chains stopped. For 3 seconds, the basin was silent. Then something moved between the trees. I saw at first a ripple of shadow, too tall to be a bear, too narrow to be human. It stood behind a thicket of pine, just visible as a vertical interruption in the light. Then another shape to its left. Then a third to the right. They didn't walk. They stood perfectly still, like figures in a paused film. Caleb went pale. His hand tightened on the rail. Probably elk, he said, but his voice was thin. I grabbed the porch light switch and flipped it on, even though it was daylight. I started counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3. What are you... Counting, I hissed. Don't look at them. Just count, that's insane. 34, 35. The shapes shifted, not moving closer, leaning the way a person leans to get a better look at something curious, something amusing. 39, 40. I turned off the porch light. The shapes were gone. Caleb stared at the empty trees, breathing hard. His thermos had tipped over, coffee pooling on the deckboards. Elk, he said again, softer now. Just elk. But he didn't believe it. I could see it in the way his hands shook, the way he gathered his tools too quickly, mumbling about needing to check another property. He promised he'd be back next week to finish the generator inspection. He wasn't. That evening, I found something on the porch. It was tucked under the welcome mat, as if someone had wanted me to find it, but didn't want to be obvious. A piece of bark, curled and pale, carved with 4 shallow grooves, just like the ones from before. But this time there was something else. Pressed into the wood, faint but unmistakable, was a handprint, small, child-sized, the fingers too long. I brought it inside and placed it on the mantel, next to the others. The cabin was teaching me its language, and I was learning to listen. After Caleb left, I didn't go outside for the rest of the day. I locked the door, fed the fire, and sat at the dining table with the journal open in front of me. If the cabin had a history, it was written here. If there were answers, they'd be in these pages. I started from the beginning. The first entry was dated April 12, 1987. Written in a tidy, clerkish hand. Arrived to find the cabin in good condition. Deer tracks around the well. Snowmelt has flooded the lower trail. The basin is as I remember. Silent, watchful, and patient. That last word lodged in my mind. Patient. As if the basin were a living thing with intent and restraint. I skimmed forward. The early years were routine. Weather observations, animal sightings, maintenance notes. But threaded through them were small anomalies, inconsistencies that accumulated like sediment. The jays have returned, but they gather on the deck rail at dusk and do not move until I go inside. Their eyes are too large. June 1989. Woke to find all the windows fogged on the inside, though the cabin was warm. When I wiped the glass, my handprint remained visible from the outside. October 1991. The lake froze overnight, despite temperatures above freezing. I walked to the edge. The ice is clear as glass, and beneath it, something large and pale moves in slow circles. December 1994, my skin prickled. I kept reading. In 1996, the tone shifted. The entries became shorter, tighter, more cautious. The basin keeps what it's given. I left my father's hat on the porch by mistake. It was gone by morning. That night I heard his voice calling from the lake. Do not answer the lake. Do not give it your name. It learns quickly. The echo is not an echo. It is a mouth. I turned the page and a pressed feather fell into my lap. It was black, about 6 inches long, with a central shaft that curved slightly like a rib. The barbules shimmered in the firelight, iridescent and wrong. When I tilted it, the surface didn't catch the light. It held it the way oil holds color. The texture was off, too smooth. More like wet hair than keratin. I set it carefully on the table and kept reading. The next entry that stopped me was from 2003. Rule 3 exists because I broke it. I left a sandwich on the rail while I worked on the roof. By evening there were 11 birds. They did not eat. They did not move. They stared. I brought the food inside. They left one by one, walking backward off the rail. I did not sleep that night. I could hear them on the roof, repositioning, learning the shape of the cabin. 11 birds. 11 watches. I glanced out the window. It was late afternoon, the light going thin and blue. On the deck rail, a single bird sat motionless. A jay, or something shaped like a jay. Its head was cocked at an angle that didn't look comfortable. Its beak was slightly open, as if tasting the air. I stood and moved to the window. The bird didn't react. It sat perfectly still, watching the glass. I tapped the pane, nothing. I opened the door a crack. The bird swiveled its head 180 degrees without moving its body. Its eyes were black and wet and far too large for its skull. I closed the door. The bird remained for another 20 minutes, then launched itself into the air and flew toward the lake, not in an arc but in a straight mechanical line, like a stone thrown horizontally. I updated the journal. 1 bird observed on deck rail. Did not approach, did not feed. Departed toward lake in geometric trajectory. Rule 3 remains unbroken. The 2009 entries introduced a new detail. Fog comes up from under the lake, not across it. I have watched it rise on windless nights as if exhaled. It moves uphill against gravity. It reaches the porch and stops as if asking permission. I have learned to refuse it. That same entry included a marginal note, added later in a shakier hand. The fog is not weather. It is attention. I reread that line 3 times. Attention, not a thing, but a state. The basin noticing you, focusing on you. I thought about Rule 5. If the lake fog reaches the porch, say, "Not for me," out loud and close your eyes until the wind changes. Not a spell, not a prayer, a refusal, a way to say, "I am not what you're looking for. I am not available." I wondered how many watchers had failed to say it, and what had happened when the fog decided they were available. I flipped deeper into the journal, past entries about frost patterns and firewood consumption, until I found a section from 2011, written in a different hand, looser. More hurried. I heard my daughter last night. I know she's in Oregon. I know she didn't call. But I heard her voice from the tree line, asking me to help her find her keys. I went to the door. I put my hand on the deadbolt. Then I remembered the rules and I walked away. This morning there were small shoe prints on the porch, my daughter's size. But the prints were backward, heels facing the door. The basin knows what I love. My throat tightened. I thought about the voice I'd heard on the first night. Hello? Soft and uncertain and human. I thought about how easy it would have been to open the door. I thought about my father. The most recent entry was dated 3 weeks ago. In Mr. Halley's own hand, according to the lawyer's description, I am leaving the basin for surgery. The cabin will be watched by someone new. I have left the rules. I have left this journal. If you are reading this, you have already heard something you shouldn't have or seen something that isn't quite right. Do not try to understand the basin. It is older than understanding. It is not malicious. It is not kind. It simply is, and it has learned to want. The rules are not protection. They are negotiation. Follow them and you will leave. Break them and you will stay. Beneath that, in smaller script, the chain sound is not a threat. It is a greeting. It wants you to know it is there. I closed the journal and stared into the fire. The basin wasn't haunted. It was inhabited. And I was living in the overlap between its world and mine. In a cabin that had been built as a threshold, a place where the rules kept both sides at bay. I was a guest in something's home, and the rules were the terms of my lease. The grocery delivery came on Thursday, exactly as promised. I heard the truck before I saw it, a white Park Service pickup grinding up the fire road, moving slowly over the ruts. I stood on the porch, relieved to see another human, even one I didn't know. The driver was a woman in her 60s, maybe older, with a steel grey braid draped over one shoulder and a face carved by sun and wind into something patient and unreadable. She wore a faded ranger jacket and carried a pack so large it looked like it belonged on a thru-hiker, not a grocery delivery driver. She moved with the deliberate economy of someone who'd learned not to waste energy at altitude. "Maya Torres?" she asked, her voice low and calm. "That's me." She nodded and began unloading canned goods, pasta, coffee, batteries, a bag of apples that smelled like October. She stacked everything on the porch with the precision of someone who'd done this many times. I noticed she didn't cross the threshold. She stood just outside the door, as if there were a line only I was allowed to cross. "I'm Elise Moran," she said, straightening. "Retired Forest Service. I bring the supplies up here for Mr. Halley when he's got a watcher." "Thank you." "I wasn't sure anyone would actually—" "I come every Thursday before 2, she said, cutting me off gently. "After 2 I leave. That's my rule." The way she said it, my rule, made it clear it wasn't a schedule. It was a survival strategy. She glanced past me into the cabin, and her gaze landed on the dining table, where the rule sheet sat beside the open journal. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture relaxed slightly. "You've read them," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, you've followed them." "Yes," she nodded, as if I'd passed a test. "Good. That means you might leave here intact." I offered her coffee. She accepted but didn't sit. She stood near the hearth, hands wrapped around the mug, eyes moving over the cabin with the attention of someone inventorying details. She saw the bark pieces on the mantel. She saw the blackout curtains. She saw the journal. "You've heard it then," she said. "The chains." "Twice, and I've seen," I hesitated, "shapes in the trees." "After the chains," Elise sipped her coffee unbothered. "Some basins are echo basins," she said. "Sound gets caught, bounces around the slopes, lingers longer than it should. But this one's different. This one learned how to use the echoes, learned how to listen, how to ask. Ask for what? Attention, names, love, whatever you'll give it." She set the mug down on the mantel next to the bark pieces. "The basin isn't evil. It's just awake. And it's been awake a long time. Long enough to learn what people want and how to offer it. The voice on the first night wasn't a person," Elise finished. "But it was a voice. The basin borrows shapes, sounds, memories. It finds what matters to you and uses it. Not to hurt you. To keep you. Why?" She looked at me, her eyes pale and steady. "Because you're interesting. Because you're warm. Because the basin is lonely in its way. It doesn't understand people, but it likes having them nearby. It's learned that if it asks nicely, sometimes they stay. And if they don't follow the rules, then they stay anyway." The fire popped. Outside, the wind circled the cabin, patient and slow. Elise moved to the window and looked out at the lake. "The rules are good," she said. "But they're not complete. Mr. Halley writes the ones he knows, but every watcher adds a little more. You'll add your own if you're smart." She turned back to me. "There are 2 I follow that aren't written down yet. You should know them." I grabbed a pen. Elise spoke slowly, as if reciting something she'd memorized long ago. If you hear your name from the lake, don't answer. If it uses a pet name, something only one person would know, put your hands in the sink and turn on the cold water until your fingers hurt. It will leave you be. When the deck shadow points away from the sun, go to the hearth and stir the ash once. It remembers who lives here. I wrote them down, my hand shaking slightly. The cold water, I asked, breaks the connection. The basin pulls at you through warmth, through comfort. Cold reminds you that you have a body, that you're separate. And the ash? The hearth is older than the cabin, older than Mr. Halley, older than the surveyors who mapped this place. The basin respects the hearth. If you tend it, the basin knows you're the current keeper. It won't push as hard. Push for what? Elise shouldered her pack, her face unreadable. To see if you'll stay. She walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. The basin isn't a monster. It's a place. Places don't hate. They don't scheme. They just are. But this place has been listening for a very long time, and it's gotten good at sounding like the things you miss. How do I know what's real? You won't, she said. That's why you follow the rules. She left without another word. I watched her truck disappear down the fire road, dust rising in a thin plume behind her. The sun was already dropping behind the ridge. I went back inside, closed the door, and locked it. I checked the deck. No food, no crumbs, no scraps. I drew the curtains in the bedroom. I added Elise's rules to the journal in careful block letters. Then I sat by the hearth and waited for the shadows to shift. At 4:47 p.m., the deck shadow tilted. It pointed west, away from the sun, stretching toward the lake like a finger. I stood, walked to the hearth, and stirred the cold ash with the iron poker. The ash sighed, a soft settling sound like the cabin exhaling. The shadow corrected itself, swinging slowly back into alignment with the light. Outside, the wind paused, as if listening. Then it resumed its slow circle around the cabin. Patient and satisfied, the basin knew I was learning, and it was pleased. The first 2 weeks passed in a rhythm I almost mistook for normal. I chopped wood, logged weather, read by firelight. I followed the rules with the diligence of someone taking medication, precisely without question, because the alternative was unthinkable. The basin tested me in small ways. A knock at dusk, 3 taps, not 4, I didn't answer. A bird on the sill that watched me cook dinner. I closed the curtain. The chain sound once at dawn. I counted, eyes on the floor. Each time I passed. Each time the basin seemed to settle, like a dog circling before it lies down. But I knew it wasn't satisfied. I could feel it watching, patient and curious, waiting to see what I loved. It found out on the 16th night. I woke at 2:14 a.m. I know the time because I'd started setting an alarm for 2:10, 5 minutes before the danger window in Rule 4. I would wake, draw every curtain tight, and wait in the center of the room with my eyes closed until 2:20. It was paranoid. It was exhausting. It kept me alive. But that night I woke to something else. Fog. It pressed against the windows like breath on glass, thick and luminous in the moonlight. I sat up, heart already racing. Fog wasn't unusual in the mountains, but this wasn't rolling in from the lake. It was rising, climbing the slope in a smooth, impossible sheet moving uphill against wind and gravity. I remembered the journal. Fog comes up from under the lake. Not across it. I pulled on my jacket and crept downstairs. The cabin was cold. The fire burned down to embers. Through the window I could see the fog advancing, silent, deliberate, shoulder high. It reached the porch steps and stopped. Just stopped. Like it was waiting for permission. Rule 5 was clear. If the lake fog reaches the porch, say "not for me" out loud and close your eyes until the wind changes. I should have said it immediately, but then I heard the voice. Mija. My breath caught. Mija. I dropped the key. Help me look. It was my father's voice. Soft, tired, shaped by 50 years of speaking Spanish at home and English everywhere else. The exact cadence he used when he was frustrated with himself, when he'd misplaced his glasses or forgotten where he'd parked. I moved toward the door without thinking. Mija, it's so cold. I can't find it. My hand reached for the deadbolt. Stopped, my fingers hovered over the metal, cold, real. I could open it. I could help him. He sounded so tired. Mija, please, but my father was in Denver. My father had survived his stroke. My father didn't know where this cabin was, and my father had never, not once, called me Mija. He called me Mijita. Little daughter. Always the diminutive, always. The voice was close, too close, right on the other side of the door. Please, it said again, and this time I heard the seam where my father's voice ended and something else began. A second voice underneath, layered like harmony, smooth, toneless, curious. My hand fell away from the door. I stepped back into the center of the room, closed my eyes and forced the words out. Not for me. The cabin went silent. I kept my eyes shut. Counting breaths, 10, 20, 30. Then I heard it, the wind lifting. Not from the tree line, but from the lake, a cold gust that smelled like stone and water. It moved through the basin, rattling the shutters, pulling at the roof. When I opened my eyes, the fog was retreating. It slid back down the slope in a single smooth motion, like a blanket being pulled off a bed. The porch was empty. I should have gone back to bed. I should have locked the door and climbed the stairs and buried myself under the quilts. Instead, I walked to the window. Condensation covered the glass, thick even, as if someone had breathed on it from inside. And written in the moisture, in letters precise and small, was a single word. Stay. I reached out to touch it. My breath fogged the glass further. When it cleared, the word was gone. But on the floor near the door, something gleamed in the dim light. A key. It was iron, old-fashioned, the kind you'd see in a period film. The teeth were irregular, shaped like mountain ridges. The metal was pitted with rust, but the edges were sharp as if it had been used recently. I picked it up. It was cold, heavy, real. I turned it over in my palm. There was no lock in the cabin it could fit. I'd checked them all. The deadbolt was modern. The windows latched with simple hooks. The shed outside used a padlock. This key belonged to something else. I set it on the mantel next to the bark pieces and the feather. Then I updated the journal. Rule 5 observed. Fog reached porch. Voice used father's cadence but wrong name. Refused entry. Fog retreated. Evidence, key origin unknown, iron old. The basin offers gifts. Do not accept them. I underlined the last sentence 3 times. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat by the hearth, feeding it small sticks, watching the key on the mantel. It didn't move. It didn't glow. It just sat there, inert and patient, waiting for me to wonder what it unlocked. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I would not touch the key again. I would not try it in any lock. I would not take it outside or bring it upstairs or carry it in my pocket. The basin had learned my father's voice. It had learned what I missed, what I feared, what I loved, and it had offered me a way to stay close to that. But staying close meant staying here. I wrote one more line in the journal. The basin is not cruel. It is simply awake, and it believes it is being kind. The storm arrived on the 19th night without warning. One moment the basin was still, cold and clear under a knife-edge moon. The next, the wind hit like a living thing, slamming into the cabin with enough force to rattle the windows in their frames. I barely had time to grab the lantern and check the shutters before the power died. The cabin plunged into darkness. I lit the oil lantern with shaking hands, the match flare bright and brief. The generator was in the shed 30 feet from the back door, and I knew I wasn't going outside. Not in this. Not tonight. The wind howled. It didn't gust, it pressed constant and deliberate as if testing the cabin's seams. The roof groaned. The hearthstones ticked. I fed the fire and waited. At 7:47 p.m. the knocking began. 3 taps, polite, evenly spaced. I froze, poker in hand. A pause. Then 4 taps, another pause. Then 3 again. Someone was learning. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I watched the door, my pulse loud in my ears. The knocking stopped, but the chain sound started. It came from everywhere. North, south, east, west. A cascading metallic whisper that surrounded the cabin like a noose tightening. Not loud, but dense, layered, as if 100 chains were being shaken just beyond the walls. Rule 2. I knew it by heart. If you hear chains from the tree line, turn on the porch light and count to 40. Do not look outside until you finish. But the generator was dead. The porch light wouldn't work. My chest tightened. I grabbed the lantern, hands trembling, and carried it to the door. I opened it a crack, cold air knifed in, and set the lantern on the porch boards. The flame guttered but held. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and started counting aloud. 1. The chain sound thickened. 2, 3, 4. Something scraped the wall, slow. Deliberate wood on wood. 10, 11, 12. The porch boards creaked. Not from wind. From weight, as if something heavy and careful were testing each plank. 20. The lantern flame leaned toward the trees, pulled by something that wasn't wind. 25, 26. I kept my eyes on the floor, on my socked feet, on the hearthstones. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. 30. A shape stepped into the edge of the lantern light. I saw it in my peripheral vision, a tall, jointed silhouette at the tree line, too thin and too segmented, like something built from bones and wire. It carried chains that didn't touch the ground, that hung in loops and spirals, swaying gently. 35. It tilted its head, listening. The chains whispered. 39. The shape leaned forward, curious. 40. The chain sound broke, not faded but severed, like a laugh cut short. The shape straightened, stepped back into the trees, and was gone. I exhaled. My legs felt like water. Then I heard the windows. Behind me, the glass brightened. I turned, and every window in the cabin glowed with reflected lantern light. Except the light was wrong. It was too even, too white, and it was coming from inside the glass. Not from the room. I checked my watch. 2:13 a.m., Rule 4. Between 2:13 to 2:19 a.m. Do not look into any window glass, but I'd already seen it. My reflection stood in every pane, same jacket, same posture, same face. But the reflections were lagging, moving a half-second behind me. I turned my head. They turned a moment later. I raised my hand. They raised theirs slowly, as if dragging through water. Then the reflections smiled. I didn't. I grabbed quilts, blankets, my coat, anything, and started draping the windows. I moved fast, hands shaking, not looking at the glass. But in the last uncovered pane, I saw something else. My father. He stood behind my reflection, just over my shoulder, wearing his old work jacket. His face was tired, kind, exactly as I remembered it. He raised his hand as if to touch my shoulder. "Mijita," he whispered. The word was perfect. The word was his. I spun around. The room was empty. I turned back to the window. He was still there in the glass, waiting. "Mijita," he said again. "Unlock the door, please." My throat closed. Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to believe him. I wanted it to be real, but the rules were clear. I grabbed the last blanket and threw it over the window. His face vanished. I stumbled to the hearth, dropped to my knees, and stirred the ash with the poker. Once, clean and deliberate. The ash sighed, a soft, settling sound. The cabin timbers answered with a low, approving creak. The light in the windows faded. The reflections reset to darkness. Outside, the chain sound retreated toward the lake, fading into the roar of wind and rain. I sat on the floor back against the hearth and waited for dawn. The key on the mantel vibrated. Once a single sharp buzz, like a phone receiving a text. Then it went still. The basin had tested me. It had used my father's voice, my father's word, my father's face, and I had refused it. I wrote in the journal with a shaking hand, Night 19, storm, power failure. Rules 2 and 4 tested simultaneously. Count completed with lantern. Windows covered. Reflection anomaly observed. Father's voice used correctly. Did not engage. Stirred ash. Cabin responded. I am still here. I underlined the last sentence, because I wasn't sure for how much longer that would be true. Morning came slowly, the light grey and reluctant. The storm had passed, leaving the basin scoured and silent. No birds called. No wind moved. The lake sat like poured lead, its surface unbroken. I didn't leave the cabin until noon. When I finally stepped onto the porch, I moved carefully, as if the world had become fragile. The lantern was still there, tipped on its side, the glass chimney cracked but intact. The flame had burned itself out, and on the deck rail something had left a gift. 7 small stones, each one drilled with a perfect circular hole. They were arranged in a line, evenly spaced, the holes aligned. When I crouched to look through them, they framed the lake in 7 identical circles, like a film strip. I didn't touch them. I took a photo, updated the journal, and left them where they were. Post-storm evidence, 7 perforated stones arranged on rail, precise spacing. Origin unknown, purpose unknown, likely acknowledgement of Rule 2 compliance. Did not disturb. I made coffee. My hands still shook, By midday, I checked the cabin's exterior. No scratches, no prints, but the shutters on the north side had been opened, not torn or broken, but carefully unlatched from the outside and swung wide, as if someone had wanted to look in. I closed them, latched them, added a log to the journal. The basin had pressed harder than ever before. It had learned my voice, my father's voice, my face in the glass. It had tested me with chains and fog, and the one word that could break me. And I had held the line, but the cost was written in my bones. I was exhausted. Not physically, though I hadn't slept in 2 days, but in some deeper way, as if part of me had been spent just to stay intact. That afternoon, I added 2 new rules to the journal in careful block letters. Count aloud when the chains speak. The finish matters more than the start. The basin listens to completion, not intention. And if the basin offers a key, do not try it in any lock you care about. The key is an invitation, not a tool. I read them over twice, then closed the journal and set it back on the table. I made tea. My fingers ached from gripping the poker, the blanket, the counter. I sat by the hearth and stared into the fire, letting the heat soak into my skin. Outside, the deck shadow began to move. I checked the time. 3:42 p.m. The sun was southwest, high and clear. The shadow should have pointed northeast. Instead, it pointed west toward the lake, long and deliberate. I stood, walked to the hearth, and stirred the ash. Once, clean, respectful. The ash settled with a whisper. The shadow corrected, swinging slowly back into alignment, as if the cabin and the basin were negotiating terms. I sat back down and wrote, "The place uses kindness like bait." The rules are not to stop it. They're to keep me small enough to pass through its teeth. I stayed through the night. I kept the fire burning, the curtains drawn, the door locked. At 2:13 a.m., I sat in the center of the room with my eyes closed, counting my breaths until my watch read 2:20. No knocks. No chains, no voices, but I felt it, a tension like a weight on my skin. The basin was watching, the way you watch someone who's passed a test but hasn't graduated yet. It was waiting to see if I would stay. And I realized, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the rules weren't just survival instructions. They were seduction. Every time I followed them, I bound myself a little tighter to this place. Every time I counted, stirred ash, refused the fog, I learned the basin's language. I became fluent in its rhythms, and fluency is intimacy. The basin didn't want to kill me. It wanted me to stay, to become another voice it could borrow, another memory it could shape, another watcher who'd eventually stop watching and start belonging. I wrote that down. 2, the rules work because they make you complicit. Every time you follow them, you agree to the contract. And the contract is, you are negotiating with something that believes it loves you. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I would finish the 6 weeks. I would follow every rule. I would leave this place intact, but I would not come back, and I would not recommend it to anyone I cared about. Some thresholds are meant to be crossed only once. On the morning of my 39th day, 3 days before my contract ended, a car pulled up the fire road. I heard it from inside, an engine too small for the terrain, grinding over ruts, hesitant and unfamiliar. I set down my coffee and went to the porch, a white sedan with Denver plates parked beside the woodshed. The driver was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail and the kind of bright, restless energy that comes from spending too much time in libraries. She wore hiking boots that looked brand new. She waved as she got out. "Hi, you must be Maya. I'm Rena Colon. I'm here for the Wildflower Grant Survey." I blinked. "Wildflower Survey?" "Yeah, I'm cataloging alpine species for my master's thesis. Mr. Halley gave me permission to camp in the clearing below the cabin for a week. He said you'd be here and might have coffee." She grinned, hopeful and utterly unaware. My chest tightened. "When did you talk to him?" 2 weeks ago. He said the basin's got rare specimens. Penstemon, primrose, maybe even a sky pilot variant. It's perfect for my research." I glanced past her down the slope toward the clearing. It was a flat open space near the lake, ringed by young aspens, exposed, visible from the water. "You're planning to camp there?" I asked slowly. "Yeah, I've got a good tent, a bear canister, all the gear. They'll stay out of your way. I just need to use the porch to charge my camera batteries at night, if that's okay." She smiled. She had no idea I made her coffee. We sat on the porch and I watched her take in the view, The lake, the basin, the pines climbing the ridges. She sighed, delighted. "This is incredible," she said. "It's so quiet." "It is," I agreed, "and you've been here, what, 5 weeks? Alone? That's amazing. I don't think I could do it." "You'd be surprised what you can do," she laughed, drained her mug and stood. "Well, I should get my tent set up before it gets dark." "Thanks for the coffee. I'll see you around." "Rena." She paused halfway to the steps. I went inside and returned with a folded piece of paper. I handed it to her. "What's this?" "Rules?" I said. "For staying in the basin. Read them, believe them, follow them." She unfolded the paper, scanned it, and her smile faltered. "Is this a joke?" "No, birds are not birds. Lake fog that listens?" She looked up at me, amused and confused. "This is like a creepypasta." "It's not." Her smile faded completely. "You're serious?" "I'm serious." She glanced at the list again, then back at me. "Look, I appreciate the mountain lore, but I'm a scientist. I don't—" "The first night I was here," I interrupted, "someone knocked on the door. 4 times. I almost opened it. If I had, I don't think I'd still be here." Rena's expression shifted, not to belief but to concern. The kind of concern you have for someone who's been alone too long. "Maya, are you okay?" I almost laughed. "I'm fine, but the basin isn't. Follow the rules. If the fog reaches your tent, say, 'Not for me.' If you hear chains, count to 40. If you hear my voice outside at night, it's not me." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. "Okay, I'll—" "Keep it in mind, thanks." She left, walking quickly down the slope toward the clearing. I watched her go, watched her set up her tent in the flat space near the aspens, watched her move with the easy confidence of someone who believes the world makes sense. I envied her. That evening, I updated the journal one last time. Day 39. New arrival Rena Colon, grad student camping below cabin for 1 week. Provided rules. Uncertain if she will follow them. The basin will test her. I will observe. I paused, then added, "This place is patient. It does not need to win immediately. It learns from every person who passes through. It takes what we give it, names, voices, love, and uses them to call the next person home. The rules are not protection. They are the terms of coexistence, and coexistence requires vigilance. I will leave in 3 days. Rena will stay for 7. I hope she reads the rules." That night the wind circled the basin. I heard it spiral around the cabin, slow and deliberate, before descending toward the clearing where Rena's tent glowed like a lantern. At 10:52 p.m., I heard the first knock. 4 taps. Friendly. Even. I stood on the porch, lantern in hand, and looked down the slope. Rena's tent was zipped shut. Her headlamp was on, a small point of light against the dark. The knocking came again, closer to her tent this time. I watched. Rena's shadow moved inside the tent, upright, listening. The knock repeated. "Hello?" I heard her call. Her voice was uncertain, curious. "Don't," I thought. "Don't open it." Her shadow reached for the tent zipper, then it paused. I saw her pull something from her pocket, the folded paper. She read it by headlamp. The knocking stopped. Rena's shadow settled. The tent went dark. I exhaled. She'd read the rules, she'd followed them for tonight. That was enough. I went back inside, locked the door, and stirred the ash. The cabin timbers creaked, approving. Outside, the chain sound began, faint, distant, circling the clearing like a question being asked. And in the darkness the basin listened, patient and awake, waiting to see if Rena would be strong enough to leave, or kind enough to stay.